This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Toto Wolff has a big decision to make. Lewis Hamilton is vacating a seat that he's held since 2013, the end of an era, the start of something new. Replacing statistically the greatest of all time is not a problem you face every day, but maybe Mercedes don't need to replace him per se. It has been proven time and time again that you can achieve much success with just one lead driver. Lewis and Valtteri, Michael and Rubens, Max and Checo, the list goes on. And maybe, just maybe, Toto already has that guy right in front of him. George Russell was over 5 seasons deep into his Formula 1 career with over 2 of those years alongside Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, and it's fair to say he's held his own. He's won a race in a ground effect Mercedes, something Lewis hasn't been able to manage. He's been almost identical to Lewis over a lap over their 2 and a bit years together, and is beginning to stretch a marginal advantage this season. On paper, he does look like a driver who has the potential to be a pretty like-for-like replacement. However, along the way, George has managed to cultivate a reputation that seems to vary wildly depending on who you ask. So today I wanted to ponder whether Toto Wolff and Mercedes can really trust George Russell long term to carry the torch that Lewis Hamilton is giving him. And what about Toto Wolff's very public courting towards Max Verstappen and very openness to Andrea Kimi Antonelli, the 17-year-old, getting into that car? They've only got 2 seats. My name's Tomo. Let's talk about it. While I've been away these last few weeks in South Africa, my reading material has been this biography from James Gray on George Russell. Very interesting to read how his career came to be what it is today, starting at his most junior level. His brothers, Benji, he chased the dream first, didn't quite make it. How George signed a deal in 2014 with Prema, then Lance Stroll was announced as the driver next to him, and mysteriously the contract for George disappeared, and how he wasn't a mile off getting in the Williams a season earlier after he won the 2017 GP3 title. I've watched with my own eyes since 2019, since George joined the sport, since I started this YouTube channel, him develop, progress into a very, very clearly very, very talented racing driver. His highlight reel is stacked. It just is a P2 qualifying in a soaking wet Spa-Francorchamps in 2021. He squeezed into Lewis's 2020 Mercedes and immediately outclassed Valtteri at Sakir, should have won that race. And of course took the dub in Brazil 2022 with Lewis breathing down his neck from P2 the entire race. Didn't bottle it, didn't crumble under the pressure, and converted the dub. You cannot question the validity and the impressiveness of those picks, but you also cannot question the existence of some pretty serious lows. Back-to-back Imola horror shows in 2020 and 2021. First into the wall under the safety car, then into the side of Valtteri's Mercedes at 200 miles an hour. A litany of unforced errors in 2023, from hitting the wall in Canada to driving into Max in Vegas. And of course, you cannot forget his last-minute bottle in Singapore, clipping the wall and retiring from at least a podium finish that weekend. Look, I do think most team principals would prefer a driver who has guaranteed pace but is liable to overstepping, and to pull them back than to have a driver that only ever drives at 95%. And you would think with more experience, George should be able to pull that back and get it to where it needs to be, strike that balance better, just like Max Verstappen has. Okay, his reputation when he came into the sport was always very, very quick, but also quite crashy, hence Crashtappen. Yet over the years, we've seen him dial back those kind of head loss moments and be much more measured. I would say, as of now in 2024, he is the most complete driver on the grid, bar none. So then saying that, looking at how complete Max is now, maybe that is why Toto is so anxious about losing out potentially on the next Max Verstappen to come through. Now, Toto may have some very difficult decisions ahead of him, but I'll tell you what isn't difficult: building your very own beautiful online home using Squarespace. In fact, today I'm going to tell you about their brand new guided website design system called Squarespace Blueprint. You can choose from professionally curated layouts and styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up. Tailored to the exact needs of your brand and or business, optimized for every device imaginable. Plus it includes optimized search engine optimization tools to make sure you can get your stuff recognized out there fast. I've been using Squarespace for years, and I think you should too. If you want to give it a go, you can, free of charge. It's only when you want to publish your finished website you have to pay, and when that time inevitably comes around, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to get 10% off of your first website or domain. Look, I think Toto feels right now that with Andrea Kimi Antonelli, he's not only concerned about missing out like he did with Max in his earlier career, where Red Bull could offer him a Toro Rosso seat, Toto could only offer him an F2 drive, but also Toto's faced with a bit of a catch-22 situation like he was with George at the end of 2021. Because I don't believe Toto could have afforded to keep George in that Williams for a 4th season. I don't think that would have happened. He either gets the Mercedes seat, or I think George probably would have looked elsewhere if they'd have kept Valtteri and Lewis. But that didn't happen, and Toto did ultimately decide to break up what was arguably the most, I wouldn't say balanced, but the most cohesive and unproblematic driver pairing on the grid, bar none up to that point, right? You look at all the success Lewis had, the fact that Valtteri never really pushed Lewis. He'd have a bit of early season momentum on these odd occasions, could, out-qualify Lewis 30% of the time. He was never really a threat to Lewis, not like Jenson Button had been, not like Fernando Alonso, of course, had been, not like Nico Rosberg had been. I am of the belief that if 2021 had gone different and Lewis had won that championship, he probably would have retired, and then Toto would have been like, cool, well, I've got George in the Williams, we're going to stick him in alongside of Valtteri. George will establish dominance gradually over time against Bottas, and he'd be left with another really balanced 1-2. Now, would Valtteri have accepted that? I'm sure he would have seen George Russell coming in as a great opportunity for him to be like, you know what, Toto, I'm here, I can actually lead this team going forward. I don't think he's got the minerals to do that. He's ever had the minerals to do that, because Lewis Hamilton is generational, and I think George Russell is proving now, given how close he's been to Lewis since he jumped in the Mercedes, he's pretty generational too. Instead, for the last 2 and a bit seasons, Toto has been left trying to deal with 2 drivers who want to be number 1. There's no way Lewis is stepping back and letting George come through. George has spent too long in Williams to just sit there as a number 2, and it has come to blows. Not in a super crazy high profile way, but imagine if the context of a lot of these tussles they've had since they've been teammates was for race wins. I mean, look at how hard they were racing each other in Japan, say, for example, last season at Suzuka. Imagine that's going for a race win between the two of them. Come on, that would have been, entertainment, of course, I'd have loved that, but Toto wouldn't have. Toto would not have loved that in any way, shape or form. You can deal with it when you're in the midfield, being a bit mid, like Mercedes are right now. So then back to Kimi Antonelli, I do wonder, he's 17 years age at the minute, so he's not old enough to get into F1, even if they wanted to give him the seat. He's already got the super license point. I think he's got 67 or 69, something like that, super license points, because of how incredible he's been in junior categories. But Kimi's not old enough, and I'm not really sure who specifically Toto is worried about, stealing him away. I mean, Ferrari would make sense. They'd be the obvious one, because he is the kid from Bologna. It's a stone's throw for Maranello, but they've just signed Lewis Hamilton. They've got Charles Leclerc, who's obviously there for the long term, and once Lewis departs, Ollie Behrman's probably going to get the Haas seat now. Hulkenberg's been announced that he's going to be at Sauber next season. Behrman surely is going to be in with that seat. He does need to step it up, Ollie, in F2, but he's got enough super license points, so he doesn't really have to worry. And yes, of course, Alpine were crazy naive to allow McLaren to sneak in and snap Oscar Piastri away, having given him a lot of mileage in old Alpine cars. I'm sure that's fed into Toto's fear of losing Kimi. But talking to McLaren, they've got Lando and Oscar settled for the long term, maybe in some weird roundabout situation if Lando eventually goes to Red Bull, replaces Max, and Kimi then becomes an option for Zach Brown. Maybe, but that feels like a way off. Aston Martin are obviously going to retain the services of Lance Stroll for the foreseeable. It doesn't look like he's going to the WEC project anytime soon, and Fernando's just signed a multi-year deal, so Sonoda, Honda is probably a likely destination for him, but it wouldn't be to replace Lance, it seems, because it seems he's not going anywhere. Red Bull is obviously an interesting one, to go alongside Max. That ain't happening for Kimi Antonelli, but of course they do have racing bulls. Right now you've got Lawson, Ricciardo, Sonoda. There's talk like Christian saying that Lawson's not guaranteed anything, which is wild, because Liam Lawson has to be on the grid in 2025. That would be the biggest injustice of any driver who doesn't make it through. Lawson has to make it through, surely. They all feel like a stretch. I don't think there's any clear and obvious threat to the employment of Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes. And I get Toto wanting to be cautious, but he's still only 17. Don't push this too hard too soon. I don't think he's the right driver for that Mercedes seat, even in 2025. I just don't. They can keep giving him these private test days. They can keep that data to themselves to see if he is the real deal, because of course, if he is the real deal, get that contract slapped down in front of him. We saw Oscar took a year on the sidelines, but because he'd done so much testing for Alpine, he actually came into that McLaren seat in a pretty good place. No, for 2025, I still think, I've said this, I still think that Carlos Sainz is the right driver for that seat. He's at the peak of his powers right now and would be a really good test for George Russell as well. If Toto Wolff can look at the situation and be like, right, George has raced against Lewis Hamilton, held his own, struggled in race pace relative to Lewis, granted, but generally over a lap in particular held his own. If Carlos Sainz can come in and George can very much hold his own, if not beat Carlos Sainz in the same car as teammates, that should give Toto even more confidence than ever in the abilities of the man from King's Lynn. However, this Adrian Newey bombshell, right? It's not confirmed, but it's being widely reported by pretty much everyone in the know that he is going to leave Red Bull, gardening leave. You've got the rest of his contract, which is till the end of 2025. So he wouldn't be looking to actually start another team until 2027. So maybe this is just, I'm just going to retire and put my feet up in Marbella. I'm sure he's got plenty of money, but I'm sure Aston Martin, Lawrence Stroll, Ferrari are going to be throwing big paycheck offers at him. I said this in my video covering it. I think a Newey-less Red Bull from 2026 onwards should be of a big concern to Max Verstappen. Not only are they developing their own power unit for the first time ever, but Newey is the mind when it comes to ground effect. Of course, in recent years, Pierre Waché has started to step up and take more responsibility for that team. Ben Waterhouse as well, the technical team they have at Red Bull, it's not reliant solely on Adrian Newey, but he is a figurehead. Max does have a contract at Red Bull until 2028, but of course, all the noise that Toto has been making, again, his very public courting of Max Verstappen suggests that Mercedes, Daimler, maybe they do have the bag to buy him out of it. When Toto was asked if Max is one of his top potential candidates recently, Toto said, let's word it like this. I think this is a decision that Max needs to take, and there is no team up and down the grid who wouldn't do handstands to have him in their car. Even George Russell, when asked about Max as a potential teammate for him at Mercedes, sounded very much up for it. Every team wants a good lineup as possible, and Max is the best driver at the moment. I would welcome anyone and believe I can beat anyone. Now, to be fair, I don't know how else George could really answer this question. Like, realistically, he can't be seen to be scared of Max Verstappen coming in. That wouldn't look good at all. But do I actually believe that George believes in himself, especially having read this and really understanding as much as I can who George is as a character? I think he backs himself. I think he thinks he could beat Max in a Mercedes. So yeah, with that, I think it does genuinely leave 4 options on the table for Mercedes to fill their 2 seats from a long-term point of view. Anyway, you've got a 17-year-old Andrea Kimi Antonelli, a 29-year-old Carlos Sainz Jr., a 26-year-old Max Verstappen, and a 26-year-old George Russell. Look, the big risk for George, I think, is if Max makes the move to Mercedes, because he has to accept the challenge. He has to then at least match Max, if not beat him. I'm not concerned about George if Carlos Sainz comes in, because I think Toto picks George any day of the week over Sainz. He's younger, he's been supporting his career since he joined the Mercedes Junior program in 2016. I think there's a lot of belief there from Toto's side. And certainly, whatever happens, there's no way George loses his seat, at least before these current regulations end, because George has got his contract now until the end of 2025. So he's not guaranteed to be in that seat when the new regs come in. It's likely, but it's not guaranteed. And it does strike me that all 4 of these names, none of them look like they're lined up as being clear, happy second, number 2 drivers at that team, right? Obviously, if Max comes in, he's going to want to be number 1, no doubt. George, he's come in alongside Lewis Hamilton. He's not sat down and just accepted a second driver position. Carlos Sainz has been much closer to Charles Leclerc than I think, I thought he would be, and I think many people thought he would be. I think he's taken a clear step forward and is at the top of his powers right now. His racing IQ is pretty second to none, maybe up there with Fernando Alonso. And then, if Andrea Kimi Antonelli, if all this noise about him, right, and all this belief that Toto has, if he delivers on that, then, well, he's going to be a number one driver. He's going to be another Max Verstappen if he can actually convert and be that guy. I really hope for George that Mercedes pull their finger out and give him a package to prove his undisputed talent with. Yes, you can argue that they've always given him at least a top-end midfield car, and he has taken some of those opportunities, not all. I mean, realistically, you look across the grid, and since Max has been dominating, everyone's been liable to a mistake. Charles Leclerc has been liable to a mistake. Lewis Hamilton's been liable to a mistake. Even Fernando Alonso has been liable to a mistake. These drivers that we typically see as, you know, so consistent. I think that fight behind Max is so tight that these drivers are overstepping every now and then. George isn't alone in that. It just feels like his mistakes have been a little bit more high profile. And also George is not the most popular driver. So I think when he makes a mistake versus when certain other drivers make a mistake, I think most other drivers in that top group make mistakes. I think he probably gets a little bit more harsh criticism, in my opinion anyway. But it's fantastic in the rain. He's got unreal self-confidence, yet he's had enough moments that have humbled him. The mistakes he's made, I think they're kind of good for him, because again, reading this book, like, he's a driver with a big ego and he's always believed in himself, but having those humbling moments, I think, is good for George. He's tight with Toto, but Toto is obliged to try and get the best drivers in the team, and if that's Max Verstappen, that's Max Verstappen. But then that makes George's career at that team a lot more precarious. Get your act together, please, Mercedes, because I think if they can, he's more than capable of fighting for a championship. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you, if you were Toto Wolff, would you trust in George, or would you be thinking, you know what, Antonelli and maybe someone else is the right decision long term? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Thank you all for watching. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-ta.